We're ready, yeah.
In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this meeting in a hybrid model, both virtually and in person. The Public Works Commission is conducting this meeting May 10th, 2023 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Zoom platform and in person in accordance with the town's policy directive and guidelines issued on April 1st, 2020 and amended on May 7th. I ask that all Public Works Commissioners, town staff, and presenters activate their video and mute their microphone unless they have something to say or are participating in committee dialogue. For members of the public, when I open the meeting to public comment, in order to be recognized, please use the raise hand option in Zoom or *9 on your phone. If you are recognized, please state your name and address. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on the town's website. I, Dave DeLong, hereby call this meeting to order. All commission votes will be taken by roll call. Is that right?
Mhm.
We will start with an attendance roll call of commissioners. When I announce your name, please reply. Sven Weber.
Here.
I'm not going to call somebody's name who is not. Jeff Vassar. We don't believe he's
Not here,
present.
not yet.
Andrea Solomon.
Here.
Dave DeLong here. Jim Jerry is not present.
That's right.
Okay. Let's start with a review of the approval of the minutes. Are there any comments on the minutes?
No comment.
No comment.
Okay. Can we approve? Are you okay with approving?
The minute, absolutely.
I second.
Okay, great. All those in favor, Sven Weber,
Aye.
Andrea Solomon,
I.
David DeLong, aye. Minutes are,
Is it technicality?
yes,
We have a quorum, everybody's present, nobody's remote.
Yes.
So you don't have to do a
Call the
roll
name.
call. You
Okay.
simply just.
okay, great. Okay, we're gonna now review the calendar. Director
Okay.
Cathcart.
Very good. So we have sort of like to give you a heads up as far as the next scheduled meeting and kind of meetings out. The most important thing we have on the agenda presently is a solid waste and recycling program rate hearing. That is scheduled for June 14th. I think tentatively, I've been informed by the NRC director just more recently that she may want to come and do a presentation on the Warner's Pond Dam initiative. So we may add that to the list. And I think those are the two items that would be, or we're aware of at this point. So.
If July 12th would happen, I will be in Germany at that time. So
Okay.
either it's super late for me, or we have to find another time during the day.
Or we have a quorum
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
just know to kind of work on that. So that's good to know. Thank you. Yeah. And the summer schedule is really as needed. And sometimes the as needed will even be something outside of that date if it's really necessary in order to meet some sort of time sensitive matter, which it can happen. So this is just a placeholder.
Okay. All right, so let's see, so there's no action required on that. Can we move to the water sewer rate hearing?
Sure. I've got Jeff Morosky, Water Sewer Superintendent, with me at the table, helping develop.
Do
Go
I
ahead.
need to have a motion here about opening the meeting?
Not yet, but I just do, yes, go ahead. Let's open the meeting and, yeah.
I, Dave DeLong, hereby move to open the public hearing for the FY24 sewer rates. Any second?
Aye.
All those in favor, say aye.
I.
Aye. Okay.
All right, thank you, Dave. Yeah.
Rate hearing is open.
All right, so again, to pull this packet together, Jeff Morosky, Water Sewer Superintendent's here at the table. I've got Bob Hill in the audience. Bob is sort of our finance business guy, and we have Natasha Cormier, who is relatively new with us, but she helped, kind of develop this plan. But what I'd like to do is share the screen and give you a little overview. There was information provided in the packet. I'm not going to go over every detail. In essence, in the packet was an explanation as far as rates and rate structures. But what I want to do is take the opportunity to explain, in order to set a rate, you need a plan and a program. So I just want to remind the commission as far as where we are and how we go about setting the rates and the basis behind it. So I'm going to share my screen, bring up a presentation here. Hopefully it comes up. All right, can everybody see that? Can you see that? Natasha, Linda, remotely?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we have, and this is very similar to what was presented to the FinCom. And you may recall there was some discussion we had in detail before we set our budget up for FY24. But what I want to do is kind of reemphasize the way we develop rates is it's not just a fiscal year issue. We look 10 years out in order to understand all of the expenses, costs, and a number of assumptions that go into this 10-year pro forma, which this will feed into. So basically, you just move my screen here. The overview of the water system. Again, we have assets worth about close to $26 million, surface water supply, number of groundwater sources. We have some advanced water treatment facilities, 2 large storage reservoirs, 134 miles of pipe. And that is the infrastructure that we maintain with a number of resources of our equipment and personnel. And we have close to 5,500 customers. And so each customer is also, it's not an asset, but it's really what we're all about. A driver that we've talked about and is increasingly significant are not just sort of the customer's interest in supply and reliability, but a lot of regulatory drivers are really dictating and influencing our budget development and planning. We've talked about the Safe Drinking Water Act. That is the EPA law, requires water standards to be identified and met by public water systems. We have the Water Management Act. That's a state act that is enforced through the Department of Environmental Protection. And that has a lot of impact on our demand management and source quality protection issues. And we also are increasingly putting more time and energy into our facilities and cybersecurity. I just attended a workshop today, better part of 6 hours, where I was with a lot of other water systems talking about PFAS. And we've talked about this before. What's important about PFAS and the development of our budget is we've been in a period of uncertainty for a couple of years. And it's a significant challenge to the industry, not just Concord. But what's remarkable is, and we were on hold for a while on designing and finishing design and construction of our NAGOG treatment facility. And if you look at the compliance dates, in March, just this year, we had the next foot drop as far as what levels EPA believes is going to be a national standard for PFAS. And it is remarkably low. In essence, out of these sources of supply that I talked about, when I go to this screen with 1 surface water supply and 6 groundwater supplies, there's a high probability we need to start planning for treating all of those sources of supply because of this most recent announcement from EPA as far as a very, very low standard. There will be some time to do some additional monitoring. There'll be some time to do some planning, but it's going to be abbreviated. We're talking about a public health issue, and we've heard of sort of some extreme responses in the state and the country to date, but we're talking between 2 to 5 years where there's going to be a lot of activity, a lot of need for exploration, design, and investment. We talked at the public hearings before with the FinCom that just in FY24 alone, we have a number of important capital initiatives and projects. Most notably, and this is sort of, thank you, Bob, for ranking in order. The largest expenses are water main replacement. We have some funds identified for the NAGOG, filtration design component that we need to complete now that we know what we are designing for. And then you can see some miscellaneous other investments. Our operating and maintenance expenses, you see, are about $5.5 million a year. You can see the distribution of that between pumping, treatment, distribution. We do have a contribution to the general fund. That's for all the additional services we get outside of the water system through planning, finance department, town manager, you name it. We do depreciate, which is significant as an enterprise. This is an important aspect of our budget we need to, manage. This all leads into a proposed increase to the what I'm showing here is the residential rate structure of 12.5%. It's significant. We historically look between 3 to 5% per year because it's been predictable and we've sort of mapped that out. Our goal is ultimately to get to a 5% increase. But we can talk a little bit about how why we're at this 12.5% increase. But important to note, we have a 3-step. This is primarily for residents. It's called an increasing block rate structure. It's been designed to try and incentivize and encourage conservation. When we talk about rates and impacts, it's very important for people to understand there's no one customer that we serve. The profile is very different, even with residents. So we typically talk about when we talk about our cost of service versus other communities, it's always difficult to do this. We're more interested in just understanding the real needs and costs of Concord, and we capture that and we'll kind of share a spreadsheet of how we do this. But it gives us the ability to at least explain to people who really want to know where is the money identified, where is it going, and what's going to happen over the long term. This pro forma we use allows us to answer those questions as needed. Since we've developed it, we've had very few conversations. Occasionally, someone from the general public will want to ask. We invite them in, we talk about it. And what we have is not a situation where there's all this unknown uncertainty. People know we're available and able to share this information. But the 12.5%, we had teased last year, we knew it was coming with NAGOG and to complete the design and construction. We've subsequently learned, and I'm just explaining this, with the last introduction of the PFAS regulations that are likely going to be promulgated through EPA, we're probably looking at another 12.5% increase next year. And what does that mean? It's important to understand right now, sort of a typical customer, someone who is mindful of their water use. And let's be clear, some people are very mindful. Most people just are responsive to good practice. And there's others who are less concerned. And the reason is it's a cost and it's a quality of life for every individual. And in Concord, it's an affluent community with lots of property and green space and lawn care interests, and people spend lots of money on it. We've heard about it with, the customer. That same customer base may look at a $1,000, $2,000 water bill. It's just the cost of doing business. But for someone on fixed income with small property, that's a very significant expense. So it's not a flat rate for everybody. It's not just, it's across the board. But if someone is mindful, we say, somewhere in the $650 a year budget allowance for your water should be sufficient. It's going to go up. We're looking at about $77 per year. I think the trend over 10 years, we're going to go from somewhere about $650 to about $1,100. We have to build that in. you're going to hear, and I'm convinced because of the meeting I was just at, and I'm comfortable in knowing water rates are going to go up across the country. There's no other way to pay for what has been imposed as far as water treatment needs for pretty much every system. And so you're going to hear more and more, whether it's 12.5%, 2 years, or it's 25% or 50%, you're going to hear numbers all over the place. I always get a little leery of comparing what are we doing with others, because I know we're accountable and responsible in an enterprise, and we have the books. Some systems, you know, their revenue goes into a general fund, and they get back, you know, whatever it is they need for operation. So it's not easy to compare, but I think what's important is for us to be able to explain to anybody who really wants to know what's the basis of our rates, what's our budget look like, and Concord has a very good budget review process. The whole town meeting allows us to do this. This commission allows us to know a little bit more about the specific projects. So go ahead, please,
What
Ed.
is the discount rate? What is that? The last line on that slide, what does that mean?
That's a great question. We do have a provision for, Bob, you can kind of explain, it's for, you know, it's a needs-based, right?
It's needs-based. It primarily goes to people who are either receiving financial assistance on their CMLP electric rate. You know, if you get a discount on CMLP electric, which is entirely income-based, you automatically qualify for water. And then there are a bunch of this 3, 4 property tax programs that give you either forgiveness or a discount on property tax. And if you're eligible for any one of those programs, you also get the discount. And it basically is 50%, you know, so it's half the step 1 rate for the first 500 cubic feet, no, 600 cubic feet.
600 cubic feet.
Yeah, 600 cubic feet of water. And we have it was in the memo, I think it's 30 something people. We don't have a lot of people.
Okay.
In my 5 years in town, I've watched that number continue to go down.
Really?
It's crept down. We had 50, 60 at one point. And again, it's something where it's a service that's also through the light plant. And again, it's for those who are mindful of their water use. We still have to be able to have a rate and some relief for those who really don't have that flexibility with budgets. And that's always a primary tenet that we've had. At the same time, there's others. This third step is people are willing to pay a real premium for the water, but again, they're paying a premium for landscapers and all the other services that come along with it. So it's just a cost of doing business. There is a balance between overdrafting and drawing from our sources of supply. We're regulated on that. And it's also, there is and can be an adverse environmental impact, especially during a drought. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later with our seasonal demand management plan. But you know, it's a balance of trying to give the customer what they need, what they want. Some customers are and have found the cost of water, because they use a lot of water, significant enough where they do a cost benefit. And they decide they might want to go independently, and they'll install their own private well. That introduces other issues and challenges. It is not regulated the same way as we are. I tell people when they propose that I'll just sink a well, I'll get up your system. On one hand, I say that's good. It's less of a burden on the general town, but be forewarned, there are regulators and watershed groups who do want to put regulations in place to control that as part of this, you know, larger system. So they're forewarned, but in any event, when we talk about the impact and rates, it's just important to understand we have a conservation-based rate. It's seasonally applied. This is between May and the end of, is it October, September? October.
May 1st of October.
And, you know, because that's the time where we're really trying to have an impact. And so I mentioned this at the FinCom. No questions. I think people understand. And, you know, when we kind of look at why we have the rates we do, I think they look at the costs and the value, and they kind of understand, yes, you know, we are highly regulated. The quality is, you know, very good. The reliability is very good. And the service is very good. Please, Sven.
So, on headcount, salary increases, what's baked into the system as a general?
For salary?
Yeah.
That is all driven through the town manager, HR department. So we don't have a separate track, for instance, for water, sewer, public works.
Yeah, but the general
The
level.
general, I think it was about two or,
I think we carried 4.
was it 4% total?
So 4% points.
Yeah.
Are baked in.
And that's for the non-union. So the town of Concord has unions and non-union employees, so they have to kind of, it's a little bit of a challenge of finding the right balance, but the rates, the salary adjustments are all driven through
Yeah.
the town manager's office and HR.
So how many people are drill their own well? How is this?
Sven, they have to register. All wells are registered and permitted through the Board of Health.
Yeah.
I haven't asked that question. I'm sure, I don't know if Melissa Simoncini is on or not. She is sort of our conservation and quality expert. She may have the number. I don't know how many wells are out there right now. I do know that some of our high users have, sort of moved to private wells. We have, I think, is it 1,000 or so in-ground irrigation customers? So we have 5,500 customers total. And I don't know how many of that is residential. I actually have, may have a
Do we
slide
know
on.
how many wells there are in town?
No, that was Sven's question. I don't know. Some are private and some are for potable use. I'll say 95% of the town is served by the town water. But there's about 5% outliers of they're not close to a water system, which they actually have a well for their residential use. And then there are people even on our system who dig or drill their own well just for their non-potable use.
Is there any issue with, is it that too small a number to impact the water table or groundwater?
I've been around long enough to hear every argument under the sun on that one. I remember the modeling 30 years ago where they were doing a hydraulic model of watersheds. And at the time, the person at USGS dismissed the impact of private wells on the more macro impact. It really depends, up in the north part of Concord. It's a lot of bedrock. They don't have sand and gravel, so they draw from bedrock. Bedrock is kind of a interesting, different hydrogeologic environment. It's kind of hard to have the same science that we have in the sand and gravel, like where we draw water from. So it's complex, and I'd say less complex than any regulation would be imposed on the operation of them, because it becomes a private property issue and then a, sort of regional water issue, and really, how do you shut them off? How do you enforce? So I think the legislators have been wrestling with this for years, but it's important to know it. So I'm trying to think on the water side, if there's anything else as I go through. I'm gonna give you, so that's the proposed rate increase. I want to talk a little bit and use this opportunity to just allow you to understand what our projections are. And we've used this slide, we've sort of updated it kind of more recently, but you'll see in here, we're talking millions of dollars, on the y-axis. And if I kind of show you, this is our operating income, our operating expense. You can see our debt sticking here, down here in green. And you'll see our net income. And you'll see that we are going to be in negative for a few years, FY 27 and 28. In essence, it's because our capital projects are going to be coming in. And, if I go to the next slide, you can see this is basically, we start with a robust fund balance of $10 million. We've been building this up over years, knowing we had significant capital expenses anticipated. It was primarily for water treatment. And you can see in FY 25, 26, those two bars are primarily driven by realizing NAGOG full-scale filtration with PFAS treatment now added. So we're looking at somewhere in the $40 million range for that initiative. In 27, 28, 29, you're seeing, over, 6-7 million there. That is likely what we're going to have to invest in our other sources of supply. It won't be the same level of treatment, but the small facilities we have will likely need additions and additional equipment to allow us to treat for the PFAS. I will say the PFAS levels are low to begin with. It's not like it's a crisis. That's why we haven't had to do anything until now, but now the standards are that much lower. So
When you keep saying that much lower, they're actually that much more challenging, right?
more challenging,
Yeah.
correct. The levels are lower from
The level, the required level.
the standard is dropping down into the 4 parts per trillion.
Right.
So just a few years ago, EPA had a health advisory of 70 parts per trillion. We had no source that was near that. A few years ago, DEP, Massachusetts, developed its own standard of 20. There are a number of states, a dozen or so, that thought PFAS was important. They were not going to wait for EPA. So they promulgated their own standard. So it was sort of the beginning, and that was when we first introduced PFAS is coming to communities near us. We weren't sure at the time if we were affected. We were below the 20. We've measured in the parts per trillion up to 10 parts per trillion. We have, Hugh Cargill well. And then the 4 parts per trillion said, no, pretty much every source we have is at risk. And if you're at 3 parts per trillion, it's the same number. And EPA, this is very important, now has identified a health advisory goal for PFAS of 0. So that's not uncommon, but we only have technology that can measure down reliably to about 1 part per trillion.
So how much time will we have to get into compliance?
We're making comment on this, at least the industry. The challenge I've heard is maybe 3 years, once the standards are established. Yes. And the reason you're saying, so 3 years means the following. It's kind of like everybody needs to go buy their EV car tomorrow. Well, they don't make them.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good idea. And so the consultants, the engineers are going to be completely overbooked. The contractors who do the installation are going to be overbooked. The vendors who provide the materials are not going to have the materials. So I'm hoping somebody in Washington is willing to acknowledge that you can't impose regulations and standards that can't be met or achieved, and they need to develop a holistic approach of how are we going to get there collectively, because each community will fail if they're left to it and to their own device. And failure is just being met with an expectation that can't be realized. So that's what we're up against. But our plan, so what we're doing right now is developing a budget plan that if the other things could fall in place, then we can, have success. But we can't do anything more than at least just try and establish what the budget needs are. And everybody says, well, what about all the money down in Washington? It's a drop in the bucket as far as the real needs. And so the ratepayers, communities, one way or another, are going to be burdened with this. And I'm not even going to make a judgment on whether it's necessary or important. That's not my job. That's what EPA does. We just try to figure out how can we achieve these standards and do it in a reasonable manner. But our budget is the beginning of at least getting the funds. So if everything else comes together, then we can comply.
What's the penalty when you're like 3 years into this, are at 5 instead of 4? or 6 instead of 4? What's the
Parts per
penalty?
trillion.
Yeah, what's the penalty?
It's to be determined what enforcement EPA will have, but it's a standard that so the penalty is the following. And it's kind of an odd one. It's notification, and that's not really a penalty. It's an awareness.
Mm.
So community or whoever is getting the supply needs to be aware of what is the concentration, what are the standards, and what does it mean? And that sort of will also drive the speed of different communities and how quickly they can comply. But I think there's a lot of conversation that is well beyond this table. And you know, I met a gentleman from Vermont who isn't a supplier, he's an engineer. He was in this room at the end of the morning, after hearing everything he heard. He kind of like, he looked over and goes, am I missing something? He goes, why is nobody, he expected the room to be all agitated. I said, because we all kind of see this coming and nobody here has an answer.
Mhm.
And we're equally frustrated, but he was just in awe.
Shock and awe.
Shock and awe. So the bottom line though is it doesn't change sort of, you know, our budget, our programs, everything else. It's all about sort of the customers. It's the supply, it's water quality, it's distribution replacement. It's, you know, those are the things that we focus on. And I'd say we're better off than most because, you know, we do have at least a game plan. We do have a budget plan.
I can imagine some citizens asking, what's the science behind PFAS and the levels that they're requiring?
Yeah, we will do our best to sort of stay connected to papers, research, information, so people can, you can Google anything and end up in all sorts of, you know, paths. You know, I hope that we can offer some resources that at least provide at least some balanced, you know, information. But this is, we're going to hear more and more about it. I do. If you start reading it, get it on your algorithm on your phone, and you'll start seeing even some, you know, one of the encouraging things today was electrochemical treatment processes that don't presently exist, but are there to allow for destruction of this forever chemical. And so the process is, the technology isn't there. And that's one of the other things. We race to meet something, we spend tens of millions of dollars, and then we find out we missed the mark, or something comes in 3 to 5 years. But there is investment being made because it's being acknowledged that this is a big deal. You know, so that's sort of that's what you want to hope for. Not jumping too soon, but is there a technology that we're not using today that is innovative and can help reduce costs? So this spreadsheet I only share, this was included. There's one like this in the FinCom book, but really just for the record, this is our roll up of a lot of the expenses. And anytime, you know, any of the commissioners want to come in and talk, feel free. It's just, it's getting into the weeds, but we're comfortable to do it, and, you know, encourage you if you have an interest to come in and talk with us. So that's on the water. I'm gonna go ahead, Sven. Yeah.
So in a way, you have your kind of expense structure. You throw it against, say, in the residential side on a 3-tier system.
Yep.
I understand from the last discussions we had that we don't have kind of the billing data information as how many customers are in which sector. So we can't make really kind of a sensitivity analysis that if we, let's say, do less increase on a lower level and more increase on a higher level, are we ending up in total to the same thing?
Correct.
So is what needs to be done that we have kind of more data, billing data available so we can get smarter, because I think it's coming back with 12.5% next year, and then who knows what's coming later. We need to be more intelligent about what's the underlying customer base look like, how much are they using, and how smart can we be even more in structuring this billing structure.
Agreed. And so, you know, Sven, we've talked, we had more granular data with the billing and meter tracking system before we did this upgrade and, you know, to a new platform. And it's not so much that the platform can't offer it, it's they didn't have the input and information needed to set that up. And I think, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, we're having conversations with them. And-
I mean, this is an internal pet peeve of ours too, because, you know, it's very much understood. You know, having more granular data would give us a better tool to structure all of this. You know, we deal with a system day in and day out that is more electric centric and water centric. So that getting them to understand why we need it the way we need it is a struggle. And, you know, hopefully now that we're, for the first time since the pandemic, we're fully staffed with, you know, there's 2 management analysts once again, and those sorts of things, we can finally beat this problem into submission.
Okay.
And, you know, hopefully, you know, I won't promise for next year, but we will do our best to, by the time we're having this discussion next year, to be in a position where we can give you that kind of information, because it is, you know, it's understood why we need it. And, you know, I mean, we have, I mean, Alan, like, you know, at least twice a month says, gee, if we could get more granular data, we could. So it's something we take very seriously and we'll do our best to deliver. You hear that, Natasha?
And just so you can see,
I do. Like, trust me, my brain is just like triggering. I'm doing a lot of mental notes right now. Yes, we are coming here.
Natasha is the management analyst who's been tasked to stay on task with our consultant. So, and just as a perspective, the surveys have been done through the townhouse. I don't know, with the pandemic, there were some changes there and some staffing, but we do have information over time as far as, you know, the price signaling. And you can see for the most part, you know, some would argue we need more, you know, in the excessively priced category for a impact on, you know, sort of our conservation messaging. But for the most part, you know, it's understood that if you need to conserve, you can, and your bill is probably not that great. And if you don't really consider it a significant expense, that's why I say our profile of customers not all universal. You know, it's not a monolithic group.
I would bet this survey would look today completely different. After that, the community seems to be very sensitive after the middle school project, after general tax hike on the property tax. Every dollar feels painful.
Yeah, and it could be interesting if the townhouse does this survey again, but that's just built into, you know, over time. You know, this is just one benchmark. But anyway, if any other questions of the water?
Yeah, just one.
Sure.
The W4, the municipal service one.
Okay, yeah.
They're only getting 10% increase.
Yeah.
Why?
Okay, so the municipal, the general
Municipal service W4.
W4, municipal service are those town functions. So the budgets and operating budgets they need to plan for and absorb. It's a group that everybody's paying for. It goes through the taxes. So this is through the general fund. And these are entities that we can work with directly to impact their demand management. If we have a water demand need or challenge, we have a direct connect. It's less of asking a customer, you know, please conserve. It's more of something working with the town manager's office to get conservation imposed. So we've always used that as we have more control of that class when we most need it. That's one of the considerations for that. And then I will just say on the general class service, just to kind of use as an opportunity to educate, everybody's sort of included. Those are small businesses and large businesses. And what you'll see as far as our adjustments, they have year-round incentives to conserve. They're not seasonally driven. But you know, we do have, you know, Bob, what was the rate we have on the general class? Yeah.
Yeah, but Alan, it was never our intent to only have the municipal rate at only a 10% increase. It shouldn't be the same 12.5% increase. And I know there were a couple of corrections made in the tables as we went through, and I'm wondering whether or not, because in the one pager at the back of everything
No,
else, which is,
I did the wrong denominator, sorry.
okay,
It's actually 12.5%.
yeah, okay.
They did go up the same.
No,
It was, I mean,
I misread,
it's
the
universally
discount.
applied. Everybody
Yeah.
has the same thing.
no, I misread the denominator here.
Steve is, you're as a general fund budget planner, yes.
I misread here.
Let's see, the only other thing I want to go through the sewer fund, similar discussion. Any other questions on the water fund? Right, okay. With the sewer, again, an opportunity to educate as far as this serves only about a third of the town, so that's kind of important to understand. Generally speaking, you know, the assets that we're managing is one advanced wastewater treatment plant. We have two large pumping facilities. You know, when I consider a wastewater large pumping facility, you literally look out that window, that's the Lowell Road, that all the wastewater, or most of the wastewater in town actually comes through this campus and is pumped through that. But then we also have some smaller neighborhood lift stations, which are just very much, kind of a less volume. And what do we have? 6 of those, about 34 miles of sewer collector main. And then, you know, our manholes are also the access to the sewer system. You can see in the green on the plan here that this is the sewered areas, and you can see a lot of the town that doesn't have access to the municipal sewer.
How many clients are on the sewer? How many clients?
What do we have? There is a number here, and it's in the, I don't want to misquote it. Bob, you happen to know it off the top of your head? Yeah, let's it is in there. Actually, it should be in the memo.
Yeah.
And these rates are only relevant to people on the system.
This is only, again, these are enterprise, so when people talk about taxes,
Yeah.
they don't contribute.
Yeah.
So the 5% who don't get water aren't assessed any
Yeah.
fee.
Yeah.
Um,
And the percent,
that's
those of
right.
us who aren't on sewer don't pay these either.
Bob, did you find it? I can't find my memo right now.
I don't see it in the memo.
I don't see the number in the memo. It's one that I would think would be on the top of my head, but.
I do have my memo. Is it? I thought it was it 1,500 or something, 1,600?
Approximately, right.
Yeah, I think it's about 1,600, Sven.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm taking off the top of my head, but you know, it's pretty close.
Okay, 1,500 for 32 miles. And water is 5,500 on
134.
134 miles.
Yeah. And what you'll see is sewer is much more dense.
Yeah,
But it's usually in the downtown concentrated areas where there is sort of enough of a need to provide offsite solutions. Because the other parcels of land have space and property where they can put an on-site Title V system. So that's basically, although those same systems will also have public water, and again, less dense. The biggest issue in wastewater, and I just want to get this out, and we're going to have lots of conversation about this. And part of our interest is the commission and staff is to protect the sewer ratepayer from undue burden of the town's desires and interests in economic growth, development, affordable housing. Not that we don't want to support it, but we don't want that on the back of a small group of the community disproportionately. So that's part of our rates are to provide service to the existing customers. We've done studies, and you're going to hear more about this. I'm going to go through some slides very quickly as a preamble to what I envision might be meetings in the fall where we might have larger audiences. I can share there was an interest at town meeting to talk about the sewer funds. It's interesting because, 6 people is 6 more than any of the interests of any of the other sort of consent calendar things. So, and it speaks to, well, why do we have a sewer capacity issue and why can't we accommodate affordable housing or economic growth development? And there's some it's a long answer to that story, but the bottom line is, it is somewhat detailed in some studies that included this comprehensive wastewater master plan. It triggered a number of efforts. So that was complete in 2003 on what we could do to potentially expand the system. And these are all assessments and evaluations of, different ways that could possibly, help us increase capacity. Some of the policies that the Public Works Commission has adopted over the years is to preserve and protect the capacity and allocation of it, including, you're familiar with this 1,000 gallon per day threshold. If a customer wants that kind of capacity, it's been considered significant, and staff doesn't just administratively approve it. It needs to come before the commission to get a vetting to say, is this truly in keeping with what the CWMP indicated for infill, for instance? And there's going to be some discussions coming up in the near future on this very matter. We have the regulations, just like on the water side. This is the trigger. This is under the Clean Water Act, and this is the NPDS, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System program. We have looked at ways of trying to expand the capacity of our treatment facility. We've made some pretty cogent arguments that we can and should be able to do so. They've been denied through EPA. Very frustrating for a community like Concord. But we've had, just to allow the community to know, we haven't been sitting, idle, just wondering, what's the next time we're going to have a crisis. These are some things that we've been doing actively that most of the community is unaware of. You really have to be in the weeds, but, staff and our consultants are working aggressively to try and get a breakthrough on the capacity constraint. We've looked at, alternatives, as far as these are different wastewater alternatives that we've explored. We're going to have more conversation about this in the near future. And so that's a backdrop to kind of where we may be spending time and energy over the next couple of years. When it comes to our rates, we need to address and cover for FY24. These are our capital expenditures that we're planning. Significantly, I talk about is the wastewater treatment plant, where we're doing some capital improvements, but we're also in the middle of a facilities plan over there. Jeff's very interested in trying to sort of get a better understanding of all our assets. But unlike water, we don't have in the future a large investment or burden on the ratepayer. And when I say it's manageable, we're looking at maybe 5 years out where we start spending money to replace a lot of the equipment at the facility. But that's the normal kind of planning that we're involved with.
The only caveat I would add to that is we may have some concerns on how the PFAS will shake out on the wastewater side, because that's going to trail after the water.
Yeah, thank you.
With the NIPD's permit that we just entered into, we're going to be sampling influent into the plants, effluent coming out of the plants, the discharge, the river immediately upstream of where we discharge into the river. And we'll also be testing our biosolids, our sludges. So this is all data compilation and acquisition that EPA and DEP are collecting within this permit cycle that we're in right now. And it's a 5-year permit cycle. So potentially in 5 years, we could be looking at a different NIPD's permit with brand new requirements in it to comply with possible PFAS concentrations.
Yeah, thank you. And that's, that would be, again, an industry-wide issue, not Concord. It'll be, it could be a big deal. And we're with our sludge, no, it's the kind of freight and transport of the material. We ship that off site, but that handling and cost for managing it is what would become an expense, you know, for us. I can't imagine, you know,
It's
whether
getting
this,
more and more difficult to manage and fewer sites to send it to just because of the sensitivity.
yeah, that's a very good point. Whether it's a capital investment or operating expense is to be determined, I think. So this is our operating expense. You can see about $3.6 million. A significant chunk of that is for the management. That's the contract over at the treatment plant. We have a third party, a vendor who actually operates and runs the facility. Again, like the water, because it's enterprise, we also contribute to the general fund as well. The rate adjustment here is more modest. It's the 5%. I think we only went up 2%. Was it 2% last year or
2 or 3.
was it 3?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, so this is, you know, more modest as far as a rate increase. But again, it's just a third of the town that's affected by it. I would say the sewer improvement fee is a big issue you're going to hear more about. That's the fee for people who are adding to our system. It's not insignificant. That's where when someone comes to say, we'd like your permission to have the authority to accept our waste capacity of over 1,000, that's at $44 per gallon based on Title V. So 1,000 gallons of flow is equivalent to $44,000 expense. And this is a fund. It's important to understand this. The Sewer Improvement Fund is a dedicated fund that was set up in 1987 or 89 to allow the town to collect money, knowing back then there was a capacity issue. It would be set aside so that if and when there was an expansion of the plant, we'd have a fund available to draw from. And so there's several $1 million of money available as a start to some solution that could expand capacity that would allow us to serve more customers. But understand this, these are people who paid in are current customers, but they had to pay into this fund to offset the future. When the straw breaks the camel's back, it's not, oh, how did we get here?
How much is in there?
Bob, do you know that number?
Yes, I don't think it's baked into the following.
Well, look in. I know, I'm thinking it's like somewhere in $4 million.
Yeah, well, but also understand that we have spent some of that money on inflow and infiltration.
Correct. So
Yeah.
it's not steady, but so I is an expense we do where we eliminate sewer systems were installed. Important to understand this at a time where it was a public health interest to get waste streams and in Concord specifically sanitary waste streams out of the downtown areas, the dense populated areas. And the interest was just to get it into a river, water body quickly. That was how they were originally designed. That was in its day, Concord would pump from here. They collected it from the downtown areas. There's a cistern out here. It was pumped from this building. There's a generator and a pump with an old rail that brought the coal that fired it. They'd pump by day the flow, the waste stream from here to the sand beds. If you follow the Reformatory Branch Trail and all those sand beds up there, that's beautiful sand. And engineers, it was filtration. So it was a natural place to bring the waste stream and put it through sand filtration.
Oh, shoot.
In its day,
Yes.
in its day, it was state of the art. It was different than going directly to the river. And then over time, there were improvements made to enhance the management of the solids that were going along with the waste stream. And so those were upgrades in the 50s. And then in in the 84, 85 period is when the town put the advanced treatment facility that's presently up there. That was part of the Clean Water Act, when the state and federal government said, we care enough about the environment. We want to enhance treatment. This is for the environment, not public health. And we're gonna give 90% of the funding is gonna be state and federal funding.
When did you say that happened?
That was from the Clean Water Act from the 70s, and the
EPA was created in
EPA
69 in the Nixon administration, and then Clean Water Act, I believe, was 1974. I think Safe Drinking Water Act was prior to that, 72, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah. So this was the commitment from the feds as far as for cleaning, you know, the waste stream. But so the pipes that were installed over 100 years ago are clay pipes. And they were not at the time intended to be super tight. In fact, some pipes were designed to take stormwater as well, because there was no cost for treatment. It was just getting it to a different location. Every time we advance treatment and costs of treatment go up, it requires, you now have to look at, well, treating groundwater is not efficient. And if you're treating groundwater and seeping into your pipes, you're not able to treat the sanitary waste from a business or a residence. So systems are spending money to tighten those old pipes, and that's what we've been doing. So as Bob said, we take that fund because in essence, it's a source of capacity. And we take the money that was come in and we've maintained our NIPD's permit. That's the important thing. We've added customers to our collection system.
Recovering lost capacity is what it's doing, allowing us to connect to more customers.
So I have to ask a little slightly off topic question. So we have the sewer improvement fund with
Yep.
about 4 million. We have on the water side reserves of
That's 10.
10. So we're talking about $14 million. Who's managing these $14 million?
The finance department.
And what's the yield on this?
I don't ask. They.
We've tried.
So we are part of the town, right?
Yeah, but still, this is, at least we should, there should be some yield on it, like a 4% yield.
Yeah, I mean,
And it sits for years.
yeah, I mean, the town invests the money. It's just we're not the drivers of the investment, that sort of thing. I don't know whether.
Could
well,
we request from whatever, the finance committee or whatever?
Sure, yeah, we can ask.
The
yeah,
report
yeah.
of the yield.
Yeah.
On these funds.
Sure.
And then would love to see was that added to the fund or was that used somewhere else?
Yeah, well, it's part of the challenge with the town is kind of like our general fund contributions. It's not precision, so we're part of the same community. And the investment for finance is primarily, I would say, dictated through the town manager's office, ultimately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even if it's 3.5.
Yeah.
I just
No,
want to
I
know
mean,
what. the
I can
yield is.
assure you, we do get interest income because I see it on the, the financial reports and that sort of stuff. But as to you're saying, is there a discrete water fund that is invested, that the yield is
Is X.
entirely tied to that? I can't say that because I think you're gonna find that it's rolled into a general town pot.
Yeah, but
We'll
We can ask.
yeah,
I'll get that in.
I have another question.
Sure.
Unrelated to it, if that's answered.
Yeah.
Last year at town meeting, there was a lot of interest and concern and controversy about possibly building housing around Crosby's.
Christopher, that was the
No,
zoning
different.
for
Yes,
the
zoning.
depot
Right.
area, correct, yes.
And with all the considerable talk about the limitations in wastewater disposal.
Yeah.
How much of a barrier is that to the town? Because the town's gonna be under pressure over time to build more housing, more affordable housing.
Mhm.
And in an area like Crosby's or somewhere
Sure.
near public transportation.
Yeah.
And I just want to understand how much of this wastewater constraints are, is that a barrier now that nothing could really be built? Or how does that factor into the town's ability to support the development of affordable housing or?
Okay, so let me give you an example. Christopher Heights, very
Yes.
public and people are aware. It was a project
Yes,
near the
Concord.
MCI. They literally had a wastewater constraint where they did not, we have rules of our comprehensive wastewater master plan that the town voted on through town meeting that says this is how we want this to be managed. That was our marching orders. We submitted that to the state Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Got it certified. So those are our marching orders. That's how we're going to manage the limited capacity we have available. We made commitments to a few neighborhoods that if it was feasible, we'd extend into those neighborhoods because they were pre-existing. They would be required when and if to upgrade their Title V system to do things that would be expensive and not necessarily environmentally best, but they could get a variance because they had no choice. But the town said, we want a growth neutral plan for wastewater. We need to make an allowance for existing problem areas that we've identified if they were ever feasible. We want to allow some infill, modest, because if you have frontage or certain rights, and it was pretty modest as far as what that infill would be. But that's why the infill, when it's more than a single family house or something, usually comes before this board for a decision and determination on, is this in keeping with the town's plans and vision? So this commission could say, we understand that there needs to be affordable housing. There's an interest in mixed use in this neighborhood. And we are, and they've gotten, there's no issues with the NRC, the planning board, all those are supportive. We still haven't exceeded our capacity. And we can we'll make this accommodation for infill. So there's a role that this commission has.
Phil,
Meaning they have frontage to the sewer. We didn't necessarily know specifically this project was going to happen, but it's a small percentage of, and we know that there's, they're going to pay the fee, but we're putting the system at that much more risk, but it's in the town's best interest. So that's Christopher Heights didn't have frontage.
Yeah.
And our plan was a parcel by parcel plan. It was very sophisticated, using GIS and an algorithm on all sorts of important environmental, factors. If you didn't have frontage, we didn't want precedent where we're going to extend to an area that was outside the area that was defined by town meeting. Because then it's the gates are open.
right?
So how you're now defaulting to the plan. So Christopher Heights originally planned to do an on-site system. They then realized they couldn't get the capacity they needed. They came to ask. We said, you're not part of the plan. And it's, I hate to say it, it's like you have frontage or not, and you don't. They were very close.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it is that classic, it's like being a little bit pregnant. You can't be.
Yeah.
You're either front or not. And that was just disappointing, but we couldn't change that. With the housing density of 10% affordable housing, that is going to be an issue very soon with the town and the census that I think has just been taken. And we're going to hear more about that. And there will be a risk of 40Bs. And those are housing projects, significant density that can usurp all the local zoning rules, regulations, if they're going to sort of, add to the town's affordable housing stock. So we are at risk of having, whether it's friendly or unfriendly, a 40B project come before the commission. And basically, or not, you make a case that we don't need a approval from you. We get our approval and direction from the state. And we have questions on whether our permit through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, that's a state agency. So there could be a question on, well, do they have standing? Who has standing here? So this could get complicated. But if nothing else, if we were forced or had to accept it, we would have to accept it. What does that mean to when and if we exceed our NIPD's permit? We may exceed our NIPD's permit. At some point, we need the regulators to work with us. Because we really can't we don't have a moratorium, and that's not fair to Concord. So, these are complex issues, but they're going to come to a head sooner rather than later. And the reality is we need support from the regulators to allow us to realize zoning needs. You look at the MBTA zoning changes, they want increased density in those areas. The town doesn't have an option. Affordable housing, town doesn't have an option. On our capacity, the town doesn't have an option, but somewhere we're going to have to come to some, what is the balance?
How do you get them to work with you?
I think we are starting that. Well, we're not starting it. We've been working the best we can independently, but I think it's going to ratchet up. The town manager has already written letters to the new governor. The new governor who's touting affordable housing. So we're using this. Concord has a capacity issue. You want affordable housing. Can you work with us? Now, the challenge we have is our permit is both a state and federal permit. So, So Andrea, the question is, we got to get creative, and that's where we're going to bring a consultant on board, and we want the community to know what's going on, and we want the community support for whatever is in the town's best interest. I mean, we go ahead. I'm sorry, Sven. Yeah.
But to get the affordable housing, we need to have as a town. Means to have, because of that percentage of units built are affordable, we have to increase by several hundred units to get to the 10 to 20% affordable housing that are built with that. So it means is, do we have the capacity for 200, 300 more units on the sewer system?
Yes, because right now, and this is as we speak, we have a 1.2 million gallon allowance. It's a rolling monthly average, 12-month average. We are presently somewhere around 1 million a day. And so we have 200,000 gallons. I wouldn't say it's freeboard, but that's the capacity that we started our CWMP with.
That's 400 units, something like that.
Well, so if you put a unit or a bedroom at 110 gallons per day, your bedroom, that's how you do the calculation. It's going to be a situation where if we have to accept it, there's engineering issues and there's permit issues. We're going to be addressing both of those. But I think we do have the capacity, but it would certainly put the plan as it would retool. The plan would no longer have any standing. The basis of it, the foundation would be no longer valid. So we'd have to redo this. And that's where we're in Sven right now to look. We're bringing a consultant on to say this plan is 20 years old. And I think we have to be, pleased. It's been successful. We've managed and maintained our permit with growth, some expansion, some of the neighborhoods that we identified have been served. So, to some degree, it's a success. The question is, at what point do we just, when can we get to the next level? And that's what the next revisiting the CWMP is going to entail.
Are we doing, sorry, this is.
Yeah.
So that was not coming to the town meeting, but there was a proposal to reduce affordable housing requirement from 20% down to 10%.
Yeah.
Which more or less would double the capacity of units that would need to be built to achieve the affordable housing requirements we have to do. So instead of kind of 300 to, let's say 300 units to build to get to our affordable housing, now 600 needs to be built. When this thing is reduced from 20% to 10%. Is there any threshold where you say, stop, we can't, this amount of units we can't do without major investments in the infrastructure?
The investments in infrastructure, I think, is still their responsibility. If we needed to, you know, our infrastructure is at the treatment plant.
Yeah.
And it's a permit issue more than anything.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, can we
Please,
move
yeah.
No,
No, this is good stuff, and it's,
Questions.
this is a lot more than just the rates.
Yeah,
But
sure.
what you're having is a conversation of
Yeah.
what's behind it.
Right.
So, you know, very quickly, this is our plan, you know, for our investments over, you can see our fund balance right now. We got over, you know, it's about $7 million in the wastewater fund. You can see the red, the capital plan. You can see the more significant investments are coming in 27 and 28. That's where we're going to do a lot of the upgrades at the treatment facility collectively for just, you know, efficiencies. These investments here are more modest. The capital investment here is primarily I&I in those years. We're looking at, this just shows you, there's no plan for borrowing. There's no, you know, nothing on our radar that would say we need to borrow in the next 10 years. And, you know, basically with the opinion of the sewer, same as the water, you know, there's 17% of the customers believe it's excessively priced, but, you know, the majority are reasonably or good bargain. And yeah, I think most people appreciate they have in Concord, they actually have municipal sewer. I think that's considered you know, a value. So that in essence is the overview. Good questions. And, you know, I think you're interestingly enough, the questions you're asking are going to be parts of longer conversations down the road, not so much as the rates, but.
Okay, we have a motion, right?
We two are technically in the public hearing, so.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
yes,
at
we
this
are.
point, yeah. So just follow
Do we have a motion to vote? Do we have to vote?
actually, you can, you want to see if there's any, first.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, with,
First of all, any comments or questions from folks in the room? All set. I'd like to see if there are any comments or questions from folks online, watching online. If there are, can you raise your hand? You move that over so we make sure we see everybody, the names of everybody.
Linda and Natasha, Linda might be watching this
I
too.
can't see if there's anybody else on the.
Trying to figure out which.
Yeah, stop sharing.
Where I am.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I want.
There we go.
That's everybody. We'll scroll down and see, make sure there's nobody down there.
Oh.
Okay, I think we're all set. There are no
And I will,
comments or
yeah, let me get off
questions?
the share screen here.
questions from the public. Do we have a vote on this?
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Oh, you have to close public hearing.
no, I see I closed, but was there a vote to approve the?
Let me follow here. So you have, we need a motion to close the public hearing.
Yeah. Oh, and
So-
then the motion to approve it. I gotcha.
Exactly, yeah.
Sorry.
So I
Uh,
move to close the public hearing for the FY 24 water sewer rates.
I second.
Second, all those in favor of closing the hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The hearing is unanimously closed. We have a motion. Somebody want to make that draft motion about approving the water rates?
Sure, I hereby make a motion to approve water rate schedules and sewer rate schedules as presented and described in the fiscal year 2024. Water and sewer rate schedules memo dated May 10th, 2023, as submitted by the Public Works Director.
Second.
Motion was made by Andrea Solomon and seconded by Sven Weber. All those in favor of the water rate schedules and sewer rate schedules, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The schedules and rates were approved unanimously by the commission. Okay, we can move on then to the seasonal water demand management plan.
Okay. This now speaks to kind of good timing for this in the year. Commissioner Terry had mentioned this as far as, it's important for the commission to understand they have a role, responsibility when it comes to our demand management strategy. In the memo that was provided in the packet, we provided a sort of some background on that. But the most important aspect is that if we're required to have a plan from the state, that's through the Water Management Act. The town bylaw was established to authorize the Public Works Commission, acting as the Board of Water Commissioners, to be responsible for state of water supply conservation bylaw. So you're authorized to make declarations of different restrictions. It's evolved where we have developed a plan that is inclusive of different levels and stages of conservation. Just to explain kind of how it was set up, it's kind of important for you to see. This is the demand of our system. You can see on an annual basis the variability. I will say we used to have more demands back in the 80s and 90s. We went through a lot of conservation in town. It was the beginning of trying to be a little bit more responsible, and we were able to curtail the annual demands. So right now it's not uncommon to have anywhere from 650 million to up to 800 million gallons on average per year. But that's only a piece of the story, because if you kind of look at that, it varies based on season. And so that gets into sort of a demand management strategy is really driven by when are we most stressed, and we're most stressed during the summer. And that's where you can see the increase in supply. And while this is on an average a month, the days are even more variable. We can have peak capacities of 3.5, 4 million gallons a day. And that will really stress our system in over a short period of time. We may not be able to, we can't manage that kind of demand for an extended period. We can fairly easily manage the average day demand.
With that.
Yeah.
Can we go back? In the proposed rules, as usual in the last years, plus. Oh, no, I think I'm fine. Okay.
Okay.
Please brought us.
Yeah. So basically, the plan is primarily driven to provide education and outreach. The education is an awareness of what you can do to conserve, primarily with outdoor watering. But it escalates depending on conditions. And the conditions are driven by either our supply side. If things, we have a number of sources of supply, but they're not always available. They are mechanical. Some can be taken offline or need to be taken offline for service or scheduled service, and sometimes failures. You can have a PLC motor pump go, and it's offline for weeks, maybe months. A lot of systems you don't want to run all of your sources at 100%, 24 hours a day. But we are close to that during peak demand period. And that's inclusive of when we kind of operate NAGOG as well. Our commercial is this is their customers. You can see, this is the makeup of our customer base. And really, when you look at the commercial, institutional, mixed use, there isn't a lot of opportunity for season. They're not influenced the seasonal demand as much as the residential, customers. There are standards at the state that are established at 65 gallons per day per capita. That's for every, kind of single family home. You can see how Concord compares to that standard. There are consequences, and they're getting more and more if you don't comply. It gives the regulators an opportunity to, sort of, they have a stick and they may use it. But you can see that Concord over the last couple of years, we're at 62, 64. So we're below that 65 gallon per capita, but that's on average. And again, I talked already about there are some people who conserve very much and others who don't. And this is sort of how it comes out, when you average them all together. The actual plan consists of the following. It's got a number of tiers. We've developed this with a lot of input from the community. There hasn't been a lot of conversation lately, but it identifies and as a result of a lot of back and forth. And so when we had simpler plans or less clear, our staff would deal with lots of calls and concerns of people who are just, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, what I'm not supposed to do, when. So this plan was devised to provide sort of clear understanding. You can see, on the left where it's different kinds of use that are, primarily seasonal in nature. We have been sort of anticipating the state's directives that, when we look at our levels, I'd like to say that we knew where they were going before they went there. So the good news is they've just imposed new regulations. We've already got the language in place. The only thing that's different is they are now using levels. And you're going to hear this more and more. And last year, you may have heard the state, lots of announcements and notices about droughts and regional droughts. And they refer to these numbers. And what we want to do is make sure we had the same numbering system. So if people in Concord heard, they would understand, yes, and it did comport with what we would be communicating as well. So that's the one sort of adjustment that we're making. But most importantly, to walk you through the conservation-based rates are message one that we've hit that demand period to conserve. It's all best management practices. It's guidance. We just try to tell people what we think they should be doing, but there's no consequences. They can do whatever, but that's the guidance. If we escalate to a lawn one restriction, what's important is that would be you're restricted to 1 day a week allowance for your property. There are consequences, and we can make enforcement, of these. So it's very important we provide outreach and let people know that we're in a level one restriction, that we're watching, their neighbors might be watching. And because there can be a fine penalty, the commission through our bylaw is the entity and authority to make such, sort of declaration. So with time, we found that sometimes events or circumstances change quickly. And rather than chase everybody down to try and get a quorum, the commission has, in the past, developed a policy where they just authorize the chair, which will be whoever is acting, the chair or vice chair, if the chair was unavailable, to make that declaration based on kind of working with me. So we can get a message out pretty quickly. And sometimes it's planned and you can anticipate it, and sometimes it could be catastrophic. And if you look, some of these things are driven by weather, and some are driven by operational constraints. Melissa, are you available? I don't know if I see you. Yeah.
Hi, Alan. I'm here.
Could you just sort of walk them through anything you think highlights here? Will I get a drink of water? Because I'll be right back.
Yep, I got a cough drop.
Sure thing. So I am with my daughter, who just got our first library card at the library. So I'll be, off camera for a few minutes. But I did hear Alan going through the levels. And essentially, the important thing to know about this plan is that it really focuses on lawn watering. It doesn't focus on ornamentals. You're free to water your ornamentals. You're free to water your flower beds and your vegetable gardens. Oh, one moment, darling, click here. So again, lawn watering is our top priority with this plan, as it really is our biggest summertime use, especially for residential customers.
So
I see you're back, Alan.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm back. I think I can talk. Thank you. So, thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
You said one issue is the peak day usage and you're using,
Up to 4 million gallons a day.
yeah, no, I'm just thinking, so you're using the garbage day as the day to use, the 1 day per week.
Yep.
So if I look to the garbage map here right now, is this kind of equally distributed that you're not generating just artificial peak days by having the garbage day, let's say on a Friday where it's in a high density, or is this?
So here's how it works. This is not a precise
Yeah, but roughly.
process. Roughly, if we had a quarter of the system, our concern is not the 1 day a week in those zones.
Hmm.
It's the every day, every other day.
So
So
in level 0, you have the problem, not in level 1.
no, when we're at level 1, we need a percentage of the community to respond positively.
Yeah.
Not everybody. We can't rely on that. If we didn't get the response, and this is where the feedback, could happen. If we're finding we're not getting enough response, we may have to go and escalate from a level 1 restriction to a level 2. And as we escalate, we provide outreach. And people, ultimately, the biggest problem we have, Sven, and it's across the board, is the fairness issue. And people concerned that I'm doing my part, what about my neighbor? That is a problem across, every conservation program I know of.
Mhm.
And what we're really hoping for, and ultimately, I think this is a fairly crude tool, but it has been effective in the past. And we don't get 100% compliance, but it does send a message. If we start, our first communication when there's a violation is a warning. We don't tend to hit
Yep.
hard with a
Sure.
penalty, a violation. It's a warning, it's a reminder. Because sometimes people are pretty busy, or you never know what they're dealing with, and this is the last thing in their mind. And then it may be, imposing a financial penalty. But over time, I want to go back to your comment on the granularity of our meter system, and that there may be tools that are going to be developed through that, where we can kind of work with customers, but ultimately they're customers, and I've been around long enough, who literally will say, what is it going to cost?
Yeah, right.
Stop harassing me. And we're really not in the position.
Another question of
Yeah.
course, yeah.
No, that's right. And basically we are your servants. We're providing the service and you're our customer. And that gets into a lot of systems have real challenges with trying to enforce. And some people go over the top, others don't. For the most part, Concord, I'd say a third of town is willing to just do what they think is right because they've been educated. Another third are willing to work within reason to, some sort of, mandate and restriction. And then, another third are really just, going to be challenged no matter what we do. But if they're using lots of water, ultimately, I would like to say they're paying a lot of money. And that money goes in and offsets some of the costs and burden on some others too. But it's a real challenge to get this one down, kind of system to system.
Right, so what is there a decision, or what do you need?
No, we want to give you an update really on the fact that we've modified the plan to include the levels to comport with the state, and to be aware the state and the community needs to be aware there's going to be more and more messaging on droughts. And we just know with climate and everything else, it's very real anyway. And we're just trying to make sure our message is consistent. So it's more of a heads up. You
don't need a motion on.
we could, if you want to adopt it, because it's really your plan. So if you want to make a motion to add this, that'd be It's kind
But
of,
in the end, you need some backing for this.
sure.
If you're implementing that without the backing of the commission.
Yeah, and we've got the levels are all there, but it's
Yeah.
just adding the level to this. So yeah, if you want to make a motion and just adopt that, as we've kind of recommended.
Would this be considered an amendment of the previous plan?
It's basically, we're taking the table, yeah, pretty much. This table is the plan.
Yeah, I would just say to make the motion to incorporate the drought level designation into your water demand management plan. That's how your recommendation
yeah.
is.
Is that clear enough for you?
Yeah.
And for Linda
It is,
to
yeah.
get in the minutes?
That's
So
right.
you can take that recommendation sentence as a whole.
So if you want to make that motion.
Yeah. So I hereby make a motion to incorporate the Secretary of Environmental Affairs drought level designation classification into Concord seasonal water demand management plan to help clarify and ensure consistency with local and state messaging.
I second.
All those in, any discussion? Any discussion? I don't see any discussion. No hands raised. All those in favor,
Aye.
say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes
Okay.
unanimously to incorporate the drought level designation classification into Concord's seasonal water demand plan, management plan.
Great.
Okay, great.
you.
Thank you. We can move on to the scenic roads regulations discussion.
Yeah, would, Jeff, thank you. I'd ask Steve Dukran to come on up, town engineer.
Jeff.
We've got, yeah, I think I'll just sort of start off where there was a meeting last night with the planning board. The Public Works Commission was invited to attend for the discussion. It was an opportunity to share some of the questions and concerns that we've discussed around this table. And given the timing, so we put it on the agenda so that, those, who weren't available, Sven Weber was available and Andrea Solomon was also available, but wasn't a quorum. So there's no decisions that need to be met, and Steve Dukran and actually Aaron McCloskey was also available. Aaron, Steve, because he manages the right of way, through the, right of way permits and road access permits. And Aaron as the tree warden for the town. So they were both sort of involved with the conversation, but I don't know if Sven, Andrea, you want to,
Any takeaways?
any comments?
I can summarize at least my impression. So my impression is that there was some progress done, at least on the tree side, if I'm correct.
Aaron isn't here yet, but yeah.
He's not here.
Yeah.
So at least that's there. I think there are still some open items. One generally is a general review by the town council, making kind of the different bylaws on the town side plus Massachusetts law and everything somehow consistent in the wordings. I think at least I had some frustration that they could always point to some other regulation where something is done, but at least for a normal citizen of the town is most likely not transparent how it looks. Second, I think there's some holes in the definition, specifically what a stone wall is. They acknowledged that, at least to my understanding, after they first said there's no need to do it, but then they changed a little bit the stance on that. And then from my perspective, the whole public safety part is still completely unclear. Where I can foresee critical situations where there is work to be done very, very quickly on whatever the stone wall is. But given how the definition of repair and maintenance is done, you can't really change kind of the original kind of structure or the original work, the original stones. It needs to be more or less exactly what is there. So you can't make really improvements when you do that. I think we were not doing a lot of progress on that side.
Yeah, although it was interesting, because one member of the planning board did ask, well, what if there's a discrepancy between what the historic commission wants, because they want to go back to how a wall was built originally, and what engineers would suggest for safety? She posed that question, but it really wasn't answered. But it was good to hear that at least one person on that board is thinking of who decides then. Is it safety and engineering, or is it aesthetics and historic appreciation?
And I think, Steve, you brought up one point that went a little bit under in there, and where perhaps in future communications, we should at least also ask town council, what is the town's liability exposure? If kind of rebuilding something and the cost of safety. So if we compromise for look and aesthetics versus safety, is there any kind of a liability exposure? And hey, what is the insurance saying of the town with respect to that? So I think that's at least the summary I have.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Also, at the very end of the whole meeting, there was a There-
I was worked up.
it was a long meeting.
later?
Yeah, they did mention, it was mentioned that, oh, the proposal for 1134 Monument Street worked out so well in the spirit of the scenic bylaw. But, I did want to ask if that was really going by the scenic bylaw, when Aaron was out there, as the tree warden, and talking about trees that may have to be cut down, which they didn't have to do. And would the planning board have had to have been there? Wouldn't they have needed a quorum if they were actually a quorum of the planning board to actually follow the scenic bylaw?
If so, it didn't get to the, I'm not exactly certain, because this was an experience we were kind of real time
Yeah.
responding to. So what I would volunteer is the following. It had a conversation with planning and public works that was a positive one before something was done that couldn't be reversed. So that was worthwhile. The schedule of it, engineering is always going to be a final decision on a road cut permit. So it's going to get there anyway. So it kind of forced them to do an assessment at a planning level well before. So it's before, in going through the planning department, which isn't the normal way they do it. With the trees, there was, based on the conversation, there is no need to take a shade tree down. Hence, there was no hearing. It was a
Okay.
conversation, but not a formal
Okay,
ask to take this tree down. If that was the case, that would have triggered a formal hearing. And even with that, there's a discussion. It's no longer just the tree warden, but it would require some members of the
at least
planning.
4.
Yeah,
So-
what I thought about that comment at the far end was, in that example, more or less none of the critical items we as Public Works Commission brought up in our letter was present. Yeah, so there was no doubt that that is a stone wall. Yeah. There was no kind of retaining wall or structural things to be dealt with. There was no public safety issue. So this was an easy example to say, oh, everything works fine. It is more kind of, what are the things where it is difficult and where it is fast and quick action to be done?
Mhm.
And where I'm personally concerned with the new kind of rules. We have now 60 days with the Historic Commission on hearing notifications. Yeah, so if it suddenly comes into 60+ days to get something scheduled, we might run into issues.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at, if they took the longest time to post and schedule a meeting, meet, discuss, decide, it's well over 60 days. So if you're talking about a construction period that you're trying to get stuff done and paid for, I mean, that's not really acceptable. So I don't know what to say other than we could put these things in a letter that succinctly describes what we're still worried about, so that it's in a record at least. It was send it to the planning board. If you look back on all the communications that went on in the like 2005, 2006 about the scenic bylaw, there were lots of letters written between committees, between chairs, to different departments. So, I mean, just sending a letter to say, hey, we're still worried about this is a record that then lasts, and people can go back to and say, maybe we should rethink this or redo this part. I don't know.
What's the status of this whole scenic bylaw now with the planning committee?
They're still trying to figure out the regulations, the actual
And then it
regulations.
needs to go through public hearing.
Mhm.
And then at a certain point, I don't know if then 1 or 2 public hearings needed for.
I don't know, it was interesting because they're trying to get settled on their final and best draft to go to a public hearing.
Yeah.
So this is, they're not there yet.
Yeah.
In fact, I did leave after the conversation. I wasn't sure if there was any additional conversation with the historic.
The historic comment came at the far end. More than
Okay,
the
yeah,
last
'cause
3 minutes
It kind of
the meeting.
occurred to me like, well, you know, it seemed odd that it was Public Works, you know, show that, you know, I was hoping they'd be asking questions, but it was more of explain your comments, I think, you know, and, you know, Steve is, he knows the nuances, and as Sven said, yes, they were referring to other sort of laws, but it's hard to follow if you don't know that. And I think, Steve, you do know some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I forget, I wasn't making it up about the planning board hearing. It is. Bylaw is not triggered for installation of utilities.
So was that from their presentation that they
Yes,
did?
on March
Okay.
8th last year.
Okay.
So that means they're installing utilities, you just don't, you can.
So the statement I made last night was, how come National Grid gets a pass, but my important sidewalk that the neighborhood wants doesn't? And the town planner said, no, National Grid doesn't get a pass, but I was going by this.
It's part of the messaging, and that's why we're trying to untangle what was said versus what's fact.
Mhm.
And town planner did volunteer. And again, it's not my wheelhouse, but this is very narrow and almost we're overthinking it. And I don't think we're overthinking, we're trying to anticipate the what ifs. This is the time to do it, but it's hard to get that understood, and ultimately it's got to be embedded in the regulations. It's just not an understanding or, you know,
Right.
message to, and that's what we're trying to get, you know, a little clarity
So
on.
I think what's very narrow is what's contained in the statutory law. MGL 40, section 15, which I know
Okay.
by heart now. So like what you mentioned before about if you have a tree that's going to be taken down, so it's up for public hearing. That law says, if you have a planning board, some towns don't, right? The planning board will hold a hearing together. It'll be a combined hearing together with the tree warden. So if that had become the case here at 1134 Monument Street, that's what would have happened.
Mhm.
So, but that is narrow. It tells you that straight from the state. But I think our bylaw is open because it allows regulations. This is what we are doing as a town with regulations. So we can exempt people. We can exempt public projects, town-owned projects.
Mhm.
I think we can. I would like to see town council review these things because the law that we operate under, the law that you guys operate under, or actually help us adopt regulations, is the private digging of roads bylaw,
Mhm.
right? It
Mhm.
clearly tells us we have full jurisdiction over what's in the right of way,
Mhm.
stone walls, trees, everything, right? And now we have bylaw, scenic roads bylaw that's telling everyone, while stone walls in the right of way come under the planning board. So
Yeah,
we need to understand that because, and here's the conflict that we have, because we were faced with the 1134 Monument Street. The application came in here, right? There aren't any rules and regulations in place to go by, right? So we kind of going to sit our pants. So they had a form, they filled out a form, and they sent it over to engineering to review. So first we looked at the stone wall. It turns out the surveyor says the stone wall is on private property. It's marked out there. If you go at the location, you'd see stakes. The stone wall is behind the stakes. The surveyor said.
Yeah, we had a
It's-
question on that from
it's
the
private.
owner, I think, huh? Or who
I
was that?
asked the question because we're getting information that says it's not in the public right of way,
Yep.
according to engineering.
But at the hearing,
Oh.
there was, I think it was the owner asking, saying, well, the stakes are clearly
Oh,
outside.
that was the neighbor across the street.
Or the neighbor
noticed
across the
that,
street,
yeah.
and the stakes are clearly outside. And then the answer from Elizabeth was, well, this is not a straight line.
Yeah, that was very confusing.
So,
Because
so
to everyone else who looks at that, they're like, the stone wall is on private property, if you look at these stakes. But the answer from the planning department is, no, there's part of it that's in it, so then it affects the whole.
I'll tell you what makes it not a straight line. Parts of the wall have collapsed.
Oh,
And the stones have fallen on the right of way side.
I mean,
ah,
this is why we need the town council to be involved, because clearly then that's not the wall. If you were to rebuild that wall, those stones would be moved then back onto private property. I mean, those stones are not the wall.
yeah,
The-
well, the definition of this stone wall, yes,
Mm.
because it's so vague.
Mhm.
Any man-made, what is this? Was it any man-made lineup of stones?
Yeah, it's way too vague.
So, I think we can go into a lot of detail like we've done before. I can pull scenarios, existing current scenarios about accidents and so on. Or I can predict what can happen in the future, a year from now, 5 years from now, and we're faced with situations. So we can go into that. And there'll always be a counter argument, like you're
Mhm,
saying,
mhm.
right?
I would be careful to get too many details. First of all, can we request a review by the town council or not?
Yeah,
Yeah, so that would be.
When you
one.
say
I heard a commitment. There is a commitment in that.
Yeah,
will
but
happen.
sometime in the future.
Yeah, I mean, before the regulations are,
Yeah, but
yeah.
I think it would be good to clarify a lot before public hearing.
I agree with that.
And not after. public hearing.
Yes, yeah.
Because if it's clarified before the public hearing, we could be supportive. in the public
Exactly,
hearing.
and that's our
Right now
intent,
we
right,
can't.
correct.
Yeah,
correct,
so-
yep,
Having a review,
Yeah.
I think it has to be clear. Hey, on a very simplified view is what are the contradicting or the different bylaws that play into role? We want to review is what was the intention of the article. So your point is like what is excluded or not in the wording around it. And say how do we make wording more precise? These are the points that and how we make sure the public safety is ensured. Because the one example you can always take is if there's the first kid injured because there was something compromised on the public safety side, we are in trouble.
So, sorry,
No, I was just gonna say, so I'm looking for an action step here or a step forward.
can I make a one point before you
Sure.
you ask for that? As I said, we can go into a lot of details and we can go back and forth, but to me, it always comes back to our role here in public works, right? I think this law, even at the state level, was intended for planning boards to control private impact
Mhm.
on stone walls and trees. like it was last night, right, at 11:34.
Mhm.
I don't think it was intended to control what Public Works does, because if you think about it, today we run projects in the street, we widen, we do all kinds of things. It never goes to the planning board, right? But anything happening on the private side of things, they go to the planning board.
Mhm.
So why would we, if we have a project in the future that's going to impact us, a stone wall or some shade trees, why would we have a hearing before the planning board? Because today we don't have any planning board. So I think the request to exempt certain projects, certain public town-owned projects, should be in order.
Mhm.
So again, I'm asking for sort of suggested, and I heard you list off a bunch of things. I'm looking for an action step for how to close this up and productively and move it forward. Does anybody have a suggestion?
Could we ask for review?
Yeah, well, I think what I'm hearing is another sort of comment from the commission to the planning board, just to highlight these 4 items.
Yeah.
Just document it. And, one thing that I'm not concerned, but I just want to be clear, because I don't want to just be, wrestling, and it's not the optics, it's something just doesn't seem right, and we're trying to be earnest, and I think we need to be, but I do believe, and it's the language in the bylaw is what matters.
Yeah.
And all the additional information, regrettably, is just that. I don't think that's, if the regulations incorporated that language, then they become codified in a regulation.
Or referenced.
If they reference, but otherwise, if they're not, then it's the regulations that we have to focus on, and that clarity and simplicity is there. But there is a concern, and I heard it early, that they did not want, they wanted some control in the right of way. There was a problem where Public Works could be, I want to say, for lack of a better word, rogue. Right? There was a concern. So that was an intent that they were looking at addressing with this.
Okay, so it's the policing of Public Works, but here's the.
One of them.
See, here's the conflict.
Yeah.
All right, so like the plan last night, they sent it to us and they asked for our engineering's opinion on the stone wall, how you cut the stone wall, how you cap the stone wall, all of kinds of things. All right, if now we have to bring a Public Works project to the planning board, when they send it back to engineering to give an opinion, I mean, what's the whole point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see a point where you say is, if the interest is to secure kind of a historic stone walls or the character of a certain street, and there's something where there's time on hand, and we as Public Works want to do something we make our own public hearing about the plan. And say, this is what the plan is, public hearing, this is how it should look like. I don't know how I think there was a public hearing on that crosswalk on Main and Walden, where how that is designed, that I think there's a way to deal with things when there's time on hand. I'm just super concerned on public safety issues. When something needs to be fixed ASAP. And we must have the authority to do things.
It's also important to understand the bylaw through town meeting authorizes the planning board to develop the regulations with input. And it's their decision. We're doing the best we can as I said last night, the community's interest is what we're after. It's not a authority issue, it's a community, what works for the community, and we're trying to make it work.
So that's the actual mandate?
Yeah, it was. The regulations were I'll look at the bylaw language, but it was to authorize. We're gonna go back. It's not the regulations, it's the bylaw.
But that doesn't mean that the bylaw needs to be under,
The
does.
town meeting is the legislative body directing the planning board to develop regulations.
yeah, but that doesn't mean that the regulation needs to be, and if they only draft or just make the regulation, it could also give authority to a public works in the public right of way. Doesn't mean that they need to
I'm sorry, I
control the
don't- yeah.
regulation.
So how do we provide input to the planning board to move this?
How about if we work on a letter to the planning board?
That'd be great.
Would that be good? Because I think.
You two have enough and we can, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, but the concern, the only challenge I have is staff to staff is not as effective.
Yeah.
You know, I
well,
thought it was good last night because your voices were all heard and listened to, which is, you know, important. And that's part of the process. So if you wanna
Yeah, let's
draft
we
something,
both can draft a letter.
I'm happy to look at it and just
Yeah.
say it looks great.
we have a- you tell you what, we have a meeting in June,
Yeah,
so we can
We'll
just
have it
review it
done by
then.
that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, I just want to capture and have something actionable. So if something comes out of this.
Yeah.
Other than our just conversation.
And I'll reach out to the planning director, just to let her know that we're taking this very seriously and we are gonna provide a
But
comment.
it's also worth noting that it's not this group's or even DPW's charge to develop this regulation. We're
We'll,
really like
we'll look at that too. I just wanna make sure we're accurate. yeah.
side on the side.
Yeah, we're providing input and that's what we were asked to do.
Right,
And
right.
taking it seriously, so.
right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would love to see that wording.
Yeah.
I probably have to look that up because someone developing a regulation doesn't mean in the end that they have the authority
Okay, well,
over it.
Well,
And there's a,
I'm not gonna,
yeah, I know, I just read the mass law. The mass law does say the planning board will conduct a hearing if there's an impact of stone wall or shade tree.
okay,
It is pretty clear.
all right.
right.
Oh, yeah, here's the.
Can I, in the interest of time, everybody's time.
Yeah.
yes,
Can I move us along?
yes.
And can I draft a motion, present a draft motion, since I'm the only one not involved in that motion? I, David DeLong, hereby make a motion to elect Andrea Solomon as chair.
I didn't know where you were, but yeah, so.
Oh, do you want to say something?
No,
about
just
your-
very briefly, just for the record. Okay,
Okay.
there's a process in place where it's a custom for the officers to turn over and allows everybody to participate and sort of, and the understanding is that there's a chair and a vice chair in their absence. And so at this point, I'd just like to kind of announce that Jeff Fasher is mentioned that he will not be continuing. So that's important. And my understanding is Jim Terry has one more year, but it's a good opportunity to sort of, turn the reins over to, and it's historically to the vice chair. Andrew, you've been serving as the vice chair for the past year, so you've even stepped in as needed. And, Sven is, aware of this process, and so that's a normal order of business. So, but the formality is that you folks need to sort of make a decision, agree, and, that's just to set the table.
Okay,
Great, okay.
okay.
So with your permission, I, David DeLong, hereby make a motion to elect Andrea Solomon as chair and Sven Weber as vice chair of the Public Works Commission, effective immediately following this meeting. I need a second.
That immediately?
You're ready to like,
I need a second.
Right, you got a second.
Okay, is there any discussion?
What happens if we abstain?
yeah, then you're stuck. You're still chair.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Congratulations.
I know, it's super majority.
All right, so thank you very much for stepping into these new roles. That's great. To wrap up our meeting here? Do we have a director's report?
Yeah, we will move through quickly. So, we
Alan,
have-
I'm going to excuse myself so I can be over there to turn the recording off.
oh, excellent. Okay. See, multitasking. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thanks,
folks.
Bob. Have a
Thank
good night. So in essence, just a quick update, really important. I want to sort of highlight. We have over 70, close to 75 years of experience
Wow.
retiring within just a couple weeks. So just to acknowledge, we have Rich Hathaway, who's a crew leader, Highway Grounds. He's retired after 34 years. Just a real stellar employee, just real committed, knows Concord, great operator and leader. And then Todd Manchuso, who's a supervisor at Water Sewer Division. He'd put over 40 years of service
Wow.
to the town of Concord. And was just sort of a key through decades as far as leadership. And no one knows the system like Todd. We
It's a
hope
lost knowledge
it
there.
really is. So, just an acknowledgement of both of their efforts, and, we will be, kind of missing their involvement, but
Did we do a letter?
you did, yeah.
To a previous.
Yeah, we can draft
employee who
something if you'd
retired,
like, yeah, on your behalf.
And well, it could be my behalf or Andrea's behalf.
Okay, that's right.
But it was a nice gesture. I think Jim suggested it.
Okay.
And could you do?
Yeah, we'll make sure we can draft
do that and
Yeah.
two
just
different
sign it
letters
from
for you.
the-
Yeah,
Just thanking them for their service.
Yeah.
and Technology. It's a
Yeah.
nice thing to do.
okay, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Patriots Day event is always a big day for Public Works, as we do a lot of the preparation. A lot of effort goes into preparing it well before the party. During the party, we were involved with sort of strategic protection and security of the site, which is really important. And then I had our Ford Lightning in the parade. So there was a nice parade and sort of acknowledgement of our practice of walking the walk with sustainability and what we
Good.
do. And, so that was kind of fun. The highway grounds were, helpful. Steve mentioned, just the other day about this incident on Lowell Road, a pretty significant accident, went through a guardrail, had impact on the culvert. Highway grounds deployed quickly to protect the site, sort of, within, hours. And we're still working on sort of resolving that, but this is a time sensitive, sort of initiative to get the guardrail up and restore the protection there. Arbor Day, we had a very nice event where there was a planting of a Jefferson elm just across the street here with the garden club. There was a gift in Public Works, and we had a great, sort of acknowledgement of Arbor Day. Steve, do you want to just quickly talk a little bit about this? This is the actual Lowell Road guardrail issue.
So, because the existing guardrail doesn't conform to current design standards, we had to come up with a plan to show how to meet those standards. So it's no replacement of the whole guardrail at this point in time, it's just the damaged part. So we prepared a plan and we sent it so that it can get installed. But it just highlights that when we do look at these projects, they could make a big difference as to what the expectations are. The current guardrail standards are, you've seen them around, it's the weathering steel, what we call core 10, and on wood posts. Both don't last as long as they used to in the past. So the state doesn't use the standard anymore because it just doesn't stand up.
Huh.
If you go around and you go close to some of these guardrails, you see where they have deteriorated, where they have become very, very thin. In fact, when this guardrail was hit, the existing one, it's mangled. You should see a shot of it. It tells you that it doesn't do a job. I'm not stating here that because of the guardrail situation, that if the guardrail was better, it would have prevented the accident. I think I've explained to staff that this guardrail there is really meant to protect folks on that side of the road. So the whole,
Yeah.
people from going off the road, as opposed to the opposing traffic. The road is wide enough that guardrail is not there to protect cars on the other side.
Because
was
this
a-
car went across that
Cross
other
over.
lane of traffic
Yes.
and then hit the guardrail and went into the
That's right.
culvert. Okay.
In some cases, you would need that. In high-speed roads, you would need guardrail to protect the opposing traffic. In this case, the road is wide enough that you don't need that.
Okay.
But the point I wanted to make is that we have to start addressing the standards. And if we go with something other than weathering steel, it will be the regular galvanized or painted, which is costs a premium. So a decision has to be made as we look into that, and we will inform the board as we start examining these standards. And when we have to change the standard, the standard does come to this board for adoption.
And there was a serious injury on this, with this event. So when we talk safety, it isn't just, hypothetical.
Does that, if we're discussing the standard of the guardrail, does that have to go before other boards or committees?
There'll be a discussion, I'm sure.
Because the reason we're using a substandard material isn't because Public Works thinks we should use it. It's
No.
because another committee thinks
Yeah,
we
we
should
had,
use it.
history is the 80s. Someone came up with that standard, that aesthetic standard, and we stuck with it.
And maybe in the eighties, it was with different information. It's now 40 years later. So, in any event, it speaks to our balance. And of course, Public Works would love it if it could be aesthetic and,
Mhm.
so, but we have to sort of juggle those. We got here.
Couple shots here. National Grid continues to do a lot of leak repairs in town. Some under emergency situation, others, they plan. So that was an example on Sudbury Road. And like we do all the time, we try to inform the public, and we taking this opportunity to do so. Public education for MS4 permit, do not put that stuff in the drain.
What is an MS?
Oh, MS4. It's a federal permit, and it's 4 S's, separated sanitary,
Storm.
Storm.
sewer, yeah.
storm sanitary system, and M is medium.
What's the,
Municipal,
Oh,
yes.
municipal.
Yeah,
right.
what's the
I should know
outcome?
that, right?
What are you trying to do?
It's basically like our wastewater treatment plant is regulated because water is being treated. This is for stormwater,
Yeah,
and stormwater increasingly is becoming identified as a need to polish, treat before it goes in the environment. And we're going to be looking at stormwater utilities to try and figure out a way of how to manage this in a way that complies with what, EPA expects of the communities. It's environmental protection standards.
So the permit was first issued in 2003, and in around 2017, I believe it was reissued with stricter standards, and so there's a lot of work. It's becoming a full-time project for us.
to treat this water, to treat.
Yeah,
the
there's been
stormwater.
assessments, that was phase one, and inventories, and soon it's going to trigger into projects that are not going to be insignificant and as far as cost and expense.
Those aren't funded yet, I assume.
No, that's why we may need a utility to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so more
Okay.
to that, yeah.
More to come. Okay,
And
thank you,
then-
Steve.
And then on water sewer, Jeff, very quickly,
Sure.
just quick update, while Jeff is coming to the table.
Be quick.
Yeah.
To be very quick.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just 2 slides. 2 things I'm emphasizing. As the commission knows, we do maintain our water mains and our hydrants. We use a flushing program
Mhm.
where we're directing the flow in a certain way to a certain velocity that will scour and lift up any debris or sediments that are accumulated in the pipes, and they'll flush out the hydrants. So it does in this process. I've got photographs of the programmable message board signs, water main flushing, the dates. It'll be wrapping up at the end of this week, and we do caution the public that this could possibly produce discolored water. It's mostly in the southern part of town and in the very last part of the program. For this particular round, you can see it's in the downtown area in the green and the blue. We do rotate 3 different zones of the town, and we do it once a year. So Not every part of town will get flushed in a given year, but it rotates on that basis. Next slide. This slide, I'm trying to show a few different things. You might have a little difficulty reading it, but this very header that's beneath the slide header, that's actually the top of a service agreement we entered into with the Care One at Concord facility. We've got about 13 compound type properties, large properties that has infrastructure within their campuses. And these are all private infrastructure. It's not town infrastructure. But when things go wrong, they look to the town usually to help or even to fix problems. And we really can't be going on to private property to repair private property. So we try to enter into a service agreement with the ownership of the parcel. And this is the very most recent one. This one was kind of pressing because there's been a lingering issue on this campus where there's been 2 out of service hydrants, and hydrants being out of service does represent some risk of public safety. So it was fortunate that we were able to resolve negotiation with the Care One and enter into the agreement. We signed the agreement just after the turn of the year. It was in January of 23. And what we ended up doing was offering a proposal to Care One to take care of this work, and then we would invoice them for the work that we did to restore this. So it's material charges for the hydrant. One of the mains was deep where one of the hydrants is, so we needed a 2-foot extension. That's another material cost. And then there was the labor rate associated with staff actually doing the work. So we'll be preparing and finalizing a invoice that we sent. And we did provide this in advance as a quote estimation with the caveat that what would be billed was the actual time, the actual materials. We initially intended to do it on a weekend, which would have incurred overtime costs, but we ended up doing it during the weekdays. It just worked out better that way. We have another property in town where off of Monument Street, it's another one of these situations where we have a service agreement. There's a failed 6-inch valve that isn't operating properly. And if it were to catastrophically fail, we would have to shut down Monument Street, and that would take a lot of customers out of service to be able to do that repair. Speaking with my operations manager, we are both of the opinion that the valve at the property line is effectively the same thing as a curb stop. So in our opinion, it's the town ownership. So we'll notify and we'll coordinate with that property owner that we're going to undertake this repair to restore the service. And we believe that it can be done in a way that will not have to shut down Monument Street. We'll have to excavate down to the valve, and a specialty contractor is able to do a repair of the valve without actually replacing the valve. So we'll be hoping to do that within the next few weeks.
And so this is more the customer service. This is Concord for everybody. It's residents. We'll be there as an emergency. We'll help where we can, even with our, sort of operations. You got Middlesex School, and if there's a problem, we're there to help them out, but we also want to manage it responsibly. So this program is.
Steve was mentioning outreach for MS4. I talked a little bit before the meeting started, but Melanie Deneen, who is the Director of Public Health for Concord, she had outreach to her network of health professionals in the state and became aware of some resource dollars that could help us produce outreach. So this brochure, I just printed it up pretty simply on our color printer, but if for distribution purposes, I might have some glossy ones printed up at a print shop. But it represents in very clear imagery and wording, I think, what not to put down toilets, what not to put down sinks. It does present also our emergency contact number, which is the police dispatch number. In case a customer were ever to have an emergency, they should not be calling 3250 on the weekend or on a holiday and expect someone to pick up that phone. So I'm very happy with this, and I think we have a burgeoning partnership happening with public health, which I'm happy about.
Good.
All right.
Great.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you very much for staying. Anything else from the director's report?
No, I think we're good.
Any comments from the public? And any comments?
Yes. Rob Wilkie, Ward 2 Central Street. I was curious, what was the discussion on the NAGOG treatment facility? What's the status? in the
So-
future of that?
So NAGOG I don't know, if we're 75% design. We held off on completion of design until we had a better sense of the PFAS
Okay,
situation. Now we know where PFAS is going, so we have to reevaluate and add a treatment process to that plant. So we're gonna have to go to work with our design engineer, finish a design. And that's gonna then result in us sort of looking again for state funding to try and sort of do the construction.
timetable this month?
Yeah, well, the plan would be within the next couple of years to construct that, yes.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Any other questions, comments from the? I'm not seeing any raised hands on the Zoom call, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move to end our meeting today.
I'll second that. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is adjourned.
So now the fun part.